the walls. Chapter 7. Minor disagreements. Mylo scanned the faces of his men, feeling the weight of their doubt and uncertainty pressing down on them like a suffocating cloud. They were a small force, 300 horsemen, 100 archers, 150 infantry, and around 100 farmers, standing against more than 1,200 trained and well-equipped COL soldiers. A cold dread began to creep into his chest. Would their strategy even matter? Could they really hope to prevail against such overwhelming odds? The fear he felt now was unlike any he had experienced, not even when he had faced Prince Raybor. Suddenly, a commotion stirred among the ranks. Horsemen appeared, galloping around the far side of the fort. For a fleeting moment, Mylo's heart skipped in fear. Was the enemy attempting a flanking maneuver? But then, the unmistakable sound of cheers and laughter reached his ears. A wave of relief washed over him. 200 more horsemen had arrived, riders from the neighboring villages. For a brief moment, hope sparked among the men. It was enough to lift their spirits, if only for a while. Position yourselves near the fortress, out of sight. Wait for the flag, Adain instructed the new arrivals, his voice steady, though Mylo could see the tension in his eyes. Adain turned to Mylo, his gaze unwavering. I understand your fear, but know this. The king's growing madness is a concern to us all. But for all his madness, there's a method to it, if you can call it that. The king has always been prophetic. He used to call town meetings, talking about dreams he'd had. Strange dreams. And more often than not, they came true. Just a couple weeks before we found you, he spoke of a man, someone he called Ulgrim, who rode a giant swine, as he put it. The king said this man would be found wandering the wastelands. So, we sent out scouts daily to search for you. And then one day, there you were. And now this Ulgrim, he said, would lead his army to victory against evil. Mylo's brow furrowed. Do you believe that? Adain glanced away, his voice quieter. The king is rarely wrong, he muttered, more to himself than to Mylo. I suppose we'll find out soon enough. He shook his head, then turned back to Mylo. Now, take your horses, conceal yourselves behind those berms, and I'll do the same at the opposite end. Be ready. When they come through, charge head-on, and we'll hit them from the side. A tense silence followed. The men took their positions, hearts pounding in their chests as they waited. It wasn't long before the signal came. A lone archer, stationed high in the trees, sent a subtle signal. The enemy was near. Mylo's pulse quickened. The air seemed to grow thick, almost suffocating, as every man held his breath, every muscle tense and coiled like a spring. The enemy forces approached the clearing. 5 of their scouts rode ahead into the clearing, their eyes scanning the surroundings with deadly precision. Mylo could feel the tension in the air like a wire stretched taut, ready to snap. He gripped his horse's reins with white knuckles, fighting the urge to make any noise that might give away their presence. The scouts circled, their eyes flicking over the terrain, scrutinizing every shadow, every movement. Mylo's stomach churned as they drew closer, and for a terrifying moment, he thought the scouts would spot him. Time seemed to stretch on, every second an eternity. Finally, the scouts turned and disappeared behind the far side of the trees. Mylo exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. 3 at a time, the enemy's horsemen crossed the gap, emerging in the clearing, their armor glinting in the dim light. The archers tensed, ready to fire at Mylo's signal. The tension was palpable, as if the entire battlefield was holding its breath. The enemy force, at least 150, maybe 200, had crossed into the clearing. Mylo glanced over at Adain, seeking a silent confirmation, but was too far away. Mylo's gut tightened, a cold, anxious knot forming deep inside him. His body screamed for action, but his mind struggled to stay focused. He was about to lead them into battle, into the unknown. The fear in his stomach felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into a chasm. The moment was upon them. With a final, sharp breath, Mylo gave the signal. Fire arrows flew, arcing through the air, creating a barrier of flames that roared to life behind the enemy, cutting them off from the rest of their army. At the same time, the shield men and pikemen poured out of the woods and positioned themselves, quickly forming their protective wall, a defensive line of shields locked together with half of the pikemen pointing their spikes outward to repel the enemy, and half pointing inward to keep the rest from fleeing. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and adrenaline. Then, with a primal roar from deep in his gut, an echo of something he had witnessed as a child in battle reenactments, Mylo raised his sword, schema, high above his head. The blade shimmered with an ethereal glow, the colors of dawn dancing along its edge. The light from the sun flickered off the blade, reflecting its brilliance across the battlefield, sparking Adain to prepare his men for action. Charge! His voice rang out, loud and clear, cutting through the tension. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, leading his men into the fray. Almost simultaneously, Adain's men surged from the side, their horses charging in unison, striking at the enemy's flank. Mylo's heart pounded in his chest as his force collided with the enemy's. The clash of steel, the cries of men, the pounding of hooves, it was chaos unleashed. Swords hit upon shields, metal collided with metal and with flesh. Their strategy seemed to be working. For over a quarter hour, they fought with great intensity, and the enemy's horse attempted to flee back through the gap but were stopped by the pikemen and archers. The smoke and fire from the line of fire created by the archers' initial volley had begun to die down. Suddenly the enemy surged, breaking through from the other side. The pikemen were no match for their numbers and were run into the ground along with the shield men. Adrian gave the signal for the extra horsemen who were near the fortress as the enemy poured through the gap. The archers in the trees had trivial effect on the speeding horsemen. Soon, the trees caught fire. Whether from the fire arrows or caused by the enemy could not be told, nor did it matter. The archers were forced out of the safety of the trees and were now easy prey for the mounted soldiers of the COL. The tide of battle was quickly changing. Mylo felt the clang of arrows from the enemy's archers bouncing off his kingly armor, attesting to its fine quality, but there was little doubt it was turning him into a target. Suddenly, Mylo saw a soldier riding straight at him. The man raised his weapon steadily and deliberately as he galloped toward Mylo. Mylo positioned his horse and stabbed violently with schema, piercing the man's armor and knocking him from his horse. Without time to wonder if he had killed the man, another soldier jumped off his horse, grabbing hold of Mylo and knocking him to the ground. Both Mylo and the man got up. The man drew his sword and swung at Mylo. He parried low and slashed at the man's leg at the same time, sending him back to the ground. Schema began to glow like the dawn and seemed to have an energy of its own. Just as water flows downhill, schema fell upon its intended target, blocking and striking with pinpoint precision. All this, it seemed to Mylo, was happening below him. It was as if he were watching someone else who looked just like him fighting a battle, like something crossed between a dream and reality. Mylo stabbed another soldier who was about to kill one of his men. Though Mylo's skills and equipment were saving him, they were fighting a losing battle. A deep horn sounded signaling the infantry, which consisted of a few elite soldiers, but also many farmers and peasants, to come and aid them. They came out running and screaming with all that was in them and began to fight. Mylo looked at the carnage and mayhem around him. By now the entirety of the enemy's forces were in and upon them. Hope seemed to be fading. He started back to his horse, who had been pierced by an arrow, to sound the horn of retreat. Just as he came to the horse, he felt a sudden pain on the back of his shoulder and neck, then everything went black. Moments later he awoke. He found himself flat on his back, barely able to breathe. The fighting was still going on around him. Something above him caught his eye, something in the sky. A red dot had appeared which quickly became a circle. I must be hallucinating, he thought. Was it the sun? A moon? What could this possibly be? Suddenly a loud boom came from above, followed by a bright sparkling display of lights and more thunderous booms. Everyone on the battlefield looked up to see what was happening. Just then, a loud booming echoing voice came from the object which loomed overhead. People of Central Midlandia, flee back to your homes, or else be destroyed by fire and lightning. Then another flash of color and more booms echoed through the land. Before Mylo could get to his feet, people from both sides began running this way and that in confusion and fear. People could be heard screaming about gods and evil spirits as they ran past. He had no time to ponder what the object was or all the noise because he was about to be trampled by panicking horses and men. With all his strength, he pulled himself up to his feet and began to stagger toward the castle. Before he even got halfway there, 2 enemy horsemen took notice of him and began to race toward him. With all his strength, he ran toward the castle, but there was no way he could outrun them. He thought perhaps they weren't after him, but he turned to look back, and they were almost upon him. He tried to pick up speed, but in doing so, he tripped and fell to the ground. They were only about 20 feet away when Mylo saw, out of the corner of his eye, Jack running at great speed. The horses were spooked by the thundering steps of the elephant, and the riders were unable to control them, and they turned and ran past Mylo. "Jack," cried Mylo. "Once again you have saved me," he said as he rose to his feet. He greeted Jack and thanked him. "I sensed you were in danger. I know you told me to go, but I couldn't," said Jack. Mylo had almost forgotten about the strange object in the sky until he saw a large circular shadow forming on the ground near him. He looked up to see the object getting lower and lower. It looked to him like a massive upside-down sack with a round deck or porch beneath it tied to it by many ropes. There seemed to be someone in it. By this time the battlefield was mostly cleared except for Mylo and Jack and the dead and wounded. "Jack, what is that thing?" asked Mylo. Jack tilted his head and peered at it with one eye. I have never seen such a thing before." Now the strange craft was hovering nearly right above Mylo, and he could see a man's familiar face looking at him from the craft. "Mylo, I am very happy to see that you are still in one piece," exclaimed the man. "Burdoc," cried Mylo as he stood in amazement. "Sorry I am late, but there was a terrible westerly wind that blew me slightly off course," said Burdoc as he adjusted a lever on the craft which was now just about resting on the grassy field. Mylo cautiously approached the strange craft and examined it. "I didn't think anyone knew I was here. I wrote to you but never got a response. Please tell me about this thing. Did you build it? It is incredible. Your letter, I suspect, was intercepted. By whom, I cannot say for sure. There will be time for your questions later. Now listen closely. There is an abandoned fortress about 8 miles northeast of here. I will meet you there, said Burdoc as he pulled back the lever and a large flame grew brighter, and the craft once again rose into the sky. And tell no one where you are going. Mylo rubbed his sore shoulder and climbed up onto the elephant. Okay, Jack. To the old ruins. And with that, they began to ride. They rode through the gap, then northeast to an old overgrown path. At one time it was a main route to the ruined fortress, which was destroyed in a battle many years ago. They came to a small river which ran north and south. They crossed the bridge to the other side. Just as he crossed, he heard the sound of many hooves up ahead. There was no time to take cover or hide. There were several horsemen and camel riders on the path and heading right toward them. It was Adian's scout returning with the reinforcements. There were well over 100 in all. Well done, Scout, shouted Mylo as they grew near. Thank you, but are we too late? Is the battle still going on? He asked. No, at least not for the moment. The enemy was driven back, but they may return, said Mylo. Where are you going? Asked the scout. I will be back. I am off to see a wizard, shouted Mylo as he and Jack sped away. The road split off in two directions, and within a few minutes Burdoc and his craft could be seen. Did you tell anyone about the balloon, Mylo? I mean that it belongs to me, asked Burdoc as he stood. The ball. I told no one. Why is it smaller now? Asked Mylo. The balloon was expanded with warm air. Now the air is beginning to leave it. Come help me fold it up, said the wizard. Burdoc, how did you know to come here? Asked Mylo as he climbed down from Jack. A fellow wizard sent out a flyer, a special letter, told me someone I knew might be in a bit of a bind, said Burdoc with a knowing laugh. A fellow wizard? Yes, you probably know him as Whitfurrows. Whitfurrows, a wizard, said Mylo. Yes, take that corner if you would and walk toward me, said Burdoc as they neatly folded the craft. Ola the Clever as he was once known. A most excellent wizard back in his day. Mylo shook his head. He never would have imagined such a bumbling blind fool could be anything like a wizard. And besides that, he talked in such a strange way. The world still has many surprises, doesn't it, Mylo? I suppose. But the battle. More COL soldiers are on their way. They will only be fooled by your craft for so long. What can we do? Asked Mylo. Burdoc sat down upon a rock, lit his pipe and sighed. Mylo, many things in the world have begun since you came here. The government has become corrupt, greedy. They will make an example out of Ash Dorn if they can. It's not only happening here, but they have increased taxes everywhere and are making every effort to collect. They use lies and propaganda to justify their actions, to what end I know not. In the time you have gone, I have looked far and wide for answers, for help and found very little. Usheme has abandoned his people in the walled city and gone into exile. Longfellow was broken out of prison by Loscroll. Now they seek assistance in Tyrevent and Wolflandia. Prison? Wolflandia, interrupted Mylo. Have you heard any word from them yet? No, not yet. But I haven't lost hope. I hope you haven't lost hope in Ash Dorn. Do you have a plan for when the enemy returns? Burdoc lowered his pipe and smiled at Mylo. Of course. You didn't think I would come here alone, did you? Mylo looked intently at Burdoc, awaiting more detail. An army, began the wizard as he blew out a puff of smoke. From the south, an old enemy of central Midlandia, now our ally. Though, not many in number come. I asked for what they could spare. They should be here by late tomorrow or early the next day. We must go back and make sure everyone is in the fortress and remains there to defend it until they arrive. As they finished hiding the balloon in the ruins, Mylo took the opportunity to inquire about the craft and how it was able to fly without wings. Mylo just couldn't imagine how hot air could be powerful enough to make something so large float. It just felt very much like magic to him. Burdoc explained how he had a dream about the craft which inspired him to build it and that he feared it might be found out by less noble minds, so he stored it away in the desert. It must not fall into enemy hands ever, even if it means we destroy it, he said as they sealed up the craft. Because they could build many of these and rain arrows down on their enemies, said Mylo. Exactly, said Burdoc. But then why don't we use it in such a way? Asked Mylo enthusiastically. Because no one should have such power, Mylo. No matter what their intention may be, said the wizard firmly. But you have that power, said Mylo, pointing out the flaw in Burdoc's reasoning. Burdoc realized the truth in Mylo's words, which momentarily irritated him. It was never intended for war, he barked as he climbed onto his horse. Okay, I think it should be safe. Now let us ride. Having Burdoc at his side, Mylo began to feel less burdened and more relaxed. It was like a touch of sanity and certainty in such an uncertain and crazy time. Burdoc, there is one thing I don't understand about these people. And what is that, Mylo? Replied Burdoc as he galloped along. They had such faith that I would lead them into victory. Were they wrong to believe that? Faith is a very powerful thing, Mylo. Sometimes it defies understanding, said Burdoc. I mean, what if they were mistaken, said Mylo. Sometimes it defies understanding, said Burdoc. Were they? If they didn't have such faith, all might have been lost. Even if they were mistaken, even if catastrophe did befall them, they lived for their belief and died for it, which is something many of us are simply not willing to do. He looked over at Mylo and smiled. Do you have faith in something, Burdoc? Asked Mylo. Yes, I do. I certainly do, said the wizard. Back at the fortress, the survivors with the addition of the riders from the north regrouped inside the walls of the fortress. Everyone began to realize they could no longer put their hopes in the prophetic dreams of a dying king. The wounded were being treated, while some worked on making arrows, and others began reinforcing walls and strategizing. Everyone was certain the enemy would return, and soon. Mylo was back and was quickly recognized. They opened the gates and let them pass. Many cheered as they realized that Mylo had not abandoned them. "This is Burdoc and his horse Apex," announced Mylo. "Burdoc is a wizard, and he is on our side." Again, the townsfolk cheered. Through the crowd of people came a man on a horse to see Mylo. It was Adain. He gave the wizard a peculiar look, then turned toward Mylo. "Mylo, the king has passed. We are without a leader. If it is your wish, we could attempt to negotiate." "Did the king tell you the whereabouts of the gold?" "He did speak of treasure, but never said where it was." "I didn't think there was any treasure. I thought it was just crazy talk," said Mylo. "There certainly was. Many months ago, the king grew paranoid and hid the riches of the land from all. It is possible that he forgot its location," said Adain. "He mentioned a map, but he said it was in his head and forgot how to read it," offered Mylo. "Without the required payment, I think we have no choice but to mount a defense," said Burdoc. "Why not just tell them the truth? That we don't have their payment. Let them come in and see for themselves, so no one else has to die," said Mylo. "I wish it were that simple, Mylo. You see, they will get their money even if they have to enslave every one of these people to do so," said Burdoc. "The wizard is right," said Adain. "Go. Pay your respects to the king while you can. We have many preparations to make." After Mylo paid his respects to the dead king, he helped out wherever he could, securing walls and moving weaponry. Meanwhile, archers were setting up on the walls and food and other provisions were brought into the fortress in case the siege lasted longer than expected. Amongst the townsfolk, rumors and chatter about the floating ball, as some called it. Some thought it was a god or spirit, and a few even thought the wizard may have conjured it. Others wanted to know if he could do it again, or if the gods would require payment for such a favor. Each person seemed to have their own version of the truth and argued their case before each other as they prepared for a war. Burdoc helped to get all the women and children to a lower level of the castle and cast spells of protection on them and everyone else. Mylo was bringing a newly forged load of arrowheads to the Fletcher when he heard the blare of the warning horn coming from the front of the fortress. There was a stir at the front gate. Adain and a few of his men rushed to the gate to see what was happening. Mylo and Burdoc also stopped what they were doing and made their way to the gate. "It is a lone horseman," cried a guard. The rider, who was dressed in fine royal armor, the same colors as that of Enkad, approached the gate. "Stop. Who are you and what business do you have here?" asked the guard. The man flipped up the visor of his helmet. "I am Enkad, son of King Nemeshad. I received word that the king is ill." "But I thought the king had no sons," whispered Mylo to Burdoc. "It is Enkad," said one of the guards. "Open the gate." Enkad rode in and spoke to Adain. "It is good to be home after all this time. I wish to see my father." "I regret to inform you. Your father died from his illness a short time ago," said Adain. "I was afraid I might be too late," he said as he bowed his head. "I have heard that the allied forces have mounted an attack against the fortress. I wasn't sure what I might find when I arrived, but it looks like you held your own. Many rumors fly about lately, but this I know. I know that you are without a king. I know my father and I had our differences, but I am the rightful heir to the throne of Ashdorn." Fëdor, who was one of the city's elders, stepped forward and interrupted Enkad. "But you gave up that right when you abandoned us. By the will of the king, you cannot be king." Now there was shouting and arguing back and forth, and it was beginning to seem like anarchy and might get out of control quite easily. Enkad directed his gaze on Fëdor. "That was a ruling which defies the code of Salderad. And you know this," he shouted. "The old laws are not," began Fëdor. "The old laws are still the laws. Upon the death of the king, his closest and oldest relative shall be the sole heir of the throne," said Enkad, quoting the old code. "A king may disown a relative if he or she disobeys or is not in line with the will of the king," said another village elder, also quoting a code. "Such an occurrence shall be reviewed by a council," shouted Enkad. "You fled before a council could be summoned," shouted another elder. "I was kicked out, and I have seen the result of such councils," said the king's son. "Enough, enough," shouted Burdoc. "This is getting us nowhere. Mylo is the closest thing you have to a leader right now. Why not let him decide?" he said, looking at Adain. "I agree," said Adain. "Mylo, what say you?" Mylo took a deep breath. He wanted nothing more than to be out from under the burden which was thrust upon him. But at the same time, he did care about these people and the faith they put in him. I say let the people decide for themselves." He turned toward Enkad and looked him in the eyes. "Lord Enkad, do you care about this land and its people?" "I have always cared about them. They have always been in my mind, even when I was far up in the Northlands and wondered if I might never return." "And do you believe you are able to keep these people safe and lead them to victory and to prosperity?" said Mylo gracefully. "I believe there is no one who would try harder to do so," said Enkad. Mylo turned to the crowd which had gathered behind them. "What about you all? Is this your king?" he said, addressing the crowd. Many cheers of "Yes," and "He is our king," along with chanting, could be heard echoing throughout the walls. Many kneeled and bowed to the new king. "Then so it is done," exclaimed Mylo. "And that, my young friend, was history in the making. If only more lands would choose their leaders in such a way," said Burdoc. The new king then drew out a horn and went over to the gate and blew loudly into the air. Not long after, around 100 horsemen made their way toward the gate. They consisted of mounted archers and swordsmen, all part of an elite force who remained loyal to Erengkad and left the village with him over a year ago. Only moments after all were inside, another unit from the southeast arrived. Their numbers were about 40 and were lightly armored, but were armed with impressive weaponry, some bearing powerful crossbows and others with throwing weapons and battle chains. "Some of Ashtorn's finest soldiers," said the new king as he encircled the new recruits with his horse. "Now let's give them a fight, shall we?" The people roared and cheered as loud as the mightiest waterfall as Adain, Erengkad, and a few other high-ranking men went into one of the buildings to privately discuss strategy. Mylo and Burdoc followed behind and opened the door as the others began to talk. "This is a private council to talk of battle, not of magic or wizardry," said Erengkad. "Perhaps the wizard has something up his sleeve," said one of the men. Laughter broke out among a few of them. "Let Burdoc speak," said Adain. "He is a friend of Mylo." "Very well," said the king, motioning for Burdoc to enter. "In fact, I do have something up my sleeve. But I need you to trust me," said the wizard. "Go on," said the king. "I need you to keep everyone inside the fortress until I give you the signal. Then you may mount an assault. Keep as many archers on the walls as possible and hold off their attack as long as you can. I would say no more than a day and a half. I can be sure you will save many lives if you do as I say," said Burdoc. "Why? Do more wizards come?" said Erengkad sarcastically. "Perhaps you should have been elected king. Help is on the way." "You must trust in that," said Burdoc confidently. "You have told us nothing. How can we trust in that?" "Who is it that is on their way?" asked the king. "If I told you, you would not believe me." Erengkad looked at his fellows and shook his head in disbelief. "He is a wizard," offered one of the men. "I do not think he lies," added another. Erengkad's eyes met Adain's. Adain gave a nod to the king, then to Burdoc. "When do we estimate the arrival of the enemy?" asked the king. 2, maybe 3 hours. It is difficult to say. They have regrouped about 5 miles south and have not yet begun to move. It appears they are waiting," said Adain. "For what?" said one of the men. Just then they all realized there was someone else at the door. It was Whitfurrows. "For one that can fight magic with magic they wait," said the old wizard. "Whitfurrows, you old fool. What are you doing in here? What on earth are you talking about?" "Another wizard?" asked Burdoc. "A wizard, yes. All precautions they will take. Afraid they are of the flying sack." "Yes," said Whitfurrows. "And how did you come by this knowledge?" asked Adain. "A feeling I have," he said. "Not as blind as I look. Believe me you will," he said as he went away beating his cane back and forth, gently humming. "It makes perfect sense," said Burdoc. "But the word from the west is that they've banned all forms of wizardry and fortune-telling," said one of the elders. "Banned?" gasped Burdoc. "No, only those who won't work for the government," said another man. "The wizards, they burned down the school of philosophy, so they may be coming for them," said the elder. "Wizards would do no such thing," said Burdoc angrily. "These are just unfounded rumors," said Adain. "I should have foreseen something like this." Rage fell upon Burdoc, followed by concern for his fellow wizards. "Meredith," he thought to himself. "They may harm her in looking for me." He made up his mind that as soon as he was finished helping these people, he would go to her. But where would they go? They had lived in their home at the foot of the mountains for years. It was too painful to think about. He would have to wait for his wife before making any such decisions anyway. "I will see to it that the archers are in place. I need people to go out and make sure everyone is inside the walls. And any food, water, lumber, animals, anything else we might need must be inside," instructed Adain. "Wizard, I will wait until midday tomorrow for your help to arrive and no longer," said Erengkad as he arose and began to exit the building. With that, the meeting had ended, and the waiting began. Burdoc remained in the room after everyone else left. It was dead silent in the room. He began to take deep breaths and closed his eyes. His mind began to clear, and he directed his focus onto the enemy encampment. He sensed only a dim glow of magical energy emanating from the camp. He breathed a sigh of relief. No, he thought, this one that travels with them is not a powerful mage. He uttered a few magical words, a spell to hopefully slow the enemy's movement, buying them more time to prepare. Meanwhile, Mylo had some armor pieced together for Jack, who insisted on being by Mylo's side this time around. It wasn't as good as the armor he wore at the skirmish with Raybor, but it was better than nothing. After Burdoc was finished, he walked over to the armorer where Mylo and Jack were. "Mylo, Jack," he began as he examined Jack's armor. "I am sure we can hold them off until help arrives, but after this is over, you will be on your own once again. I need to go to my dear Meredith and bring her someplace safe. And I am doubtful such a place is anywhere near here." "Then where will you go?" "Will I see you again?" asked Mylo. "I am not sure yet, but I am working on that." If you would stay here with these people and look after them for a while, I can get a message to you. Our victory here should buy us a bit of time to figure things out, said Burdoc. Their conversation was interrupted by a disturbance near the gate. A scout had returned from the enemy's encampment and rode into the fortress. The enemy is on the move. They will be here within the hour, he cried. By this time, everyone was in place and the final preparations were mostly complete. The main gate was secured. Mylo, stay back for now. Let the archers do their work. Hopefully you won't have to do anything this time. The wizard then held out his hand, his palm facing Mylo, and whispered a brief blessing and protection over both of them. I must go. I have more tricks up my sleeve that I must prepare. Usheme and his crew had caught the current that led to the river that ran through the village of Ariad. It took them only about 9 hours to reach the town. How will we know what we are supposed to do when we get there? Asked one of the crew. I would expect we will be given a sign, said Usheme confidently. If not, we will spread the good word until we receive the sign. In 2 days, the festivities will be underway at the walled city, said another man. Anyone worth preaching to will be there. You may be right, but would it not make more sense to preach to people who are not followers, said Usheme. It was about midday when Usheme and his crew arrived at Ariad. It was a large fishing village, and the river that was fed by the Great Lake ran right through the town. They docked their boats at the town marina and went into the town. The town, as might be expected, smelled strongly of fish. Much of the town was built over the water. The river crashed upon every post and piling in its path in a steady, hypnotizing rhythm. The villagers hurried along on the wooden roads and causeways with their wheelbarrows loaded with the day's catch. Squawking seagulls buzzed overhead and begged for scraps of food. It was a clear but windy day, and Usheme had a difficult time keeping his hood, which he used to conceal his identity, over his head. But nevertheless, he stood out due to his stature. The crew followed the only one of their ranks who had any familiarity with the town. I still don't understand why we are here, said one of the followers. These people are too caught up in the details of their lives to care about the gods or mastery over fate. Most people who do in fact seek the gods never find them because they do not look low enough, said Usheme. How can you be sure they don't care? And besides, the reason will reveal itself soon. Up ahead, town square. Nested in the center of town was a beautiful garden area with benches for seating arranged around an octagonal opening which revealed the flowing waters beneath the town. Let us sit and meditate, said Usheme. They all sat and enjoyed the soothing sounds of the watery town. Usheme prayed and waited patiently and expectantly for a sign or a message telling him why Ariad, why this busy fishing village this close to the festival when the real action was elsewhere. Soon after they all sat, a young man in semi-formal dress approached. He didn't appear to be a fisherman, perhaps a merchant of some kind. I am sorry to bother you, but if I may have a moment of your time, said the man. Usheme picked up his head and opened his eyes. Oh, I am sorry. I didn't realize you were asleep. It's all right. I was not sleeping. How can I help you? He asked. Perhaps we can help each other. I don't recall seeing any of you here, and I assume you are visitors in need of lodging. Is that so? Usheme nodded and waited for the man to continue. I own an inn, just down the way there. Business is never so good this close to a major festival with everyone flocking to the cities. If you are in need of lodging, I can offer you a significant discount. Let us say, half price, said the man as he smiled and looked around at them all. If everyone here is in agreement, we accept, said Usheme looking at his crew. Well, I believe you have a deal. We'll check in as soon as we are finished here. Excellent. I will reserve your rooms. It is the finest inn in town, I assure you, said the man as he began back to his inn. The crew checked in and continued to explore the village, and Usheme remained vigilant for a sign, although he suspected the visit from the innkeeper may have been what he had waited for. Night fell upon the busy village, and they returned to the inn. The innkeeper looked up from his reading to watch them enter their rooms. It was close to morning, but still dark when there was a bustle in the lobby of the inn. The door of Usheme's room burst open. He awoke to see 4 men with drawn swords standing in the hallway. You are wanted for questioning. You must come with us, said the men. The innkeeper peered from around a corner as Usheme's crew came out of their rooms. 2 of them had secretly been carrying swords of their own and came toward the armed men. Stay back. This is COL business, said one of the men. He is not going anywhere with you, they said as they charged the men. Another member of the crew came up behind the men and struck one of them with a heavy wooden chair, which distracted the others. Usheme struck another with his fist, then the others slashed with their swords. The COL men were outnumbered. One fell dead from his wounds, another was injured, and they fled out the front door. The innkeeper cowered into his room, and Usheme and his followers made for the back exit. This was supposed to be a mission of peace, cried Usheme. We must leave the village immediately. They made their way back to the marina, but there were men walking all about the area who were most likely looking for them. They would have to abandon their boats and leave on foot before daylight came. They quietly made their way south and into the woods. What shall we do? Asked one of the crew. I think we should go to the walled city, said Usheme. We would blend in with all the other pilgrims and visitors. We would be safe at least until after the festival. They found their way to the lake path that headed east toward the walled city. It would be about a 4-hour walk to the city. The sun was beginning to rise, and the men were getting hungry. The few supplies they carried had to be left behind, so they stopped to rest and see what, if anything, they could gather for sustenance. As they foraged along the roadside, up ahead they saw a large crowd of about 20 approaching on the path. The crowd looked too large and disordered to be soldiers looking for them, but if they were pilgrims going to the walled city, they had gone much too far west. A few in the crowd recognized Usheme. "Hail," they merrily yelled. "We were on our way to Ariad to see you." "It's the ones from Hamfereld," said one of the crew. "We travel to the walled city of Idriaxlin. You are welcome to join us."